Go hard or go home. You are listening to Industrial Industries World Radio with your host, the ultimate party DJ, DJ Glowing Ice, for an episode of Industrial Industries World Radio. Show me what you got, DJ.
Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Industrial Industries World Radio, and this is episode 15. I hope this is meeting you well, and you're in good health, and good shape, and good luck, and good spirits. Yeah, there we go. What we are going to talk about today is SimCity from the Super Nintendo days, just the very first SimCity, or some people like to call it SimCity Classic. So we're going to talk about the story behind it, the creator, Will Wright. He's a very eccentric individual, very eccentric. So we're going to talk about his life, the whole fun story behind the video game before it boom, became a huge sensation. We're going to get into that. And, there's probably some people, SimCity, why do I care about SimCity? Can you talk about a Marvel movie? I want Spider-Man. I want to watch a movie where Spider-Man, Iron Man, Spider-Man. I want Spider-Man movie. The guy's like 28. I can't wait for a new Spider-Man movie come out. Or you got the guys that are like, yeah, I'm so tortured. I'm like the Joker. Yeah, my girlfriend. Yeah, we got this crazy wild love. She's just my crazy princess. It's like, shut up. Get out of here. Move out of your mom's basement with your crazy princess. Oh, God. Okay. All right, before we get into the show, I just want to thank all of you for checking things out and sharing it with a friend and everything you do, checking this in week by week, from New York to California to old small town USA and a few other small town towns. With that being said, you can email me at industrialindustriesworldradio@gmail.com. And all right, let's get out of here. We'll be getting into SimCity and my personal experience with the game. But right now, we've got past, present, future.
Past, present, future.
Today is February 3rd, and it's National The Day the Music Died Day. 22-year-old Buddy Holly and two other musicians died in an airplane accident near Clear Lake, Iowa on this day in 1959, which was the inspiration for the song American Pie by Don McLean. In the past, on this day in 1690, the colony of Massachusetts issues the first paper money in the Americas. And in the future, in 2085, Sega's video game console, the Sega Dreamcast's internal clock, will reach its limit. So if you try to add a year past 2085, it will result in resetting the year on the clock back to 1950. February 3rd is the 34th day of the year, and there are 332 days left for the year 2020. Celebrity birthdays: actress Isla Fisher is 43, actor Nathan Lane is 63, and explorer Ferdinand Magellan was born on this day in 1480. And if it's your birthday, I want to wish you a very happy birthday, personally for me, DJ Glowing Ice. Enjoy yourself, and happy birthday. This Past, Present, and Future is brought to you by the Schlangheimer's 23rd Annual Beer and Chicken Dance. Come on by and enjoy all the best locally brewed beer, homemade fried chicken, and dance the night away as local cover bands play generic versions of your favorite classic rock songs. It's the Schlangheimer's 23rd Annual Beer and Chicken Dance benefiting the Small Town Boosters Club, happening this Saturday, February 8th at the Small Town VFW Hall. Doors open at 6 and tickets are $20 a piece. It is the Schlangheimer's 23rd Annual Beer and Chicken Dance. Be there or be chicken.
Hey cutie, if you want to make this lady happy, why don't you subscribe to Industrial Industries World Radio right now? I promise it'll make you even happier. Industrial Industries World Radio.
Alright, so before we go any further, I want to tell you what's going to be going down with the rest of the show. I'm going to tell you what SimCity's all about, we're going to get into the history of it, and then also I want to tell you about this long-lost NES prototype of SimCity that was long gone. It was planned to be released, but it never did, and for years, decades, was MIA. Nowhere to be found, up until recently. So we're going to get into the story about that a little later. But first, let's talk about SimCity. To the person that's never played SimCity, how could I explain it to you? If I was a kid on the playground trying to explain to one of my friends, what would I say? Well, first off, my experience with SimCity is probably like a lot of you out there, which my first experience playing it was on the Super Nintendo. So we're mostly going to be focusing on the Super Nintendo version because I never played the Commodore 64 version or the one on the computer or anything. It was always just the console one, the Super Nintendo, and all that. So that's the first version that I think a lot of you have played too. That's probably why you're listening, because I remember playing it on the Super Nintendo. Okay, so when you start SimCity, you basically start with just a big plot of land that you get to choose. There's 1,000 maps you get to choose from at the beginning of the game. Each map is different in a way. Sometimes it's a big, huge island, or it could just be just some plain plot of land with a little bit of a river going off to one side, or what have you. So you get to choose the layout of the land that you want to build your city on, and then we start from there. So once you choose your plot of land, you get to name your town. Now, the town names I gave it back in the day, I think the most PG-rated town name I gave it was Wachita. You know, like Wichita, but Wachita, W-A-C-H-I-T-A. And so after you get to name your town, you choose the difficulty in which you want to start. So the difficulty is how much money you start out with. So on easy, you get $20,000. On medium, you get $10,000. And on hard, you start with $5,000. 5,000 is, man, that's really hard to start out with. So if you really want to build your town up a lot just from scratch in your first year. So once you choose your difficulty, it's going to start up. The game's going to start up and you're going to be facing down onto the plot of land you chose. So your point of view is you looking from the sky down onto the ground. Top view. And you start out in the month of January in the year 1900. Now, don't let that year 1900 fool you into thinking, oh, this is historically accurate. No. You could build a nuclear power plant, you could build residentials, airports, all that in 1900 if you want to. Don't look at the date and think this is some historical, history game, because it's not. That's just the point in time you're starting from, and then you could work your way up. That's all that is. And so the month and the year is always placed up in the top left corner of your screen. And then below that, going across the top of the screen, you have 8 different green tiles that you could choose from. It goes from charts and graphs to advice. You can look at those charts and graphs to see where population density is, where pollution is, where crime is. Just different things that you could use to strategize where you want to place things in your city to help it grow. And then you got a little tile you could click on to see Dr. Wright. Oh, crazy Dr. Wright on the Super Nintendo. He'll run. Sometimes he's just this bumbling little guy, and he has glasses and wild green hair and a big purple suit, and you think he's Joker, maybe. And he's going to tell you advice, maybe give you some hints on how to help you grow your city, make it better. Or if, people are upset, he's like, oh, these people are telling me this. You need to help put more police stations here. So it's always good to check out what Dr. Wright has to say every once in a while. And then also, you can't forget the disaster tile you could click on and start an earthquake, a fire, a flood, a monster, in which it was like a Godzilla knockoff. But in the Super Nintendo version, it was Bowser. You could also have a plane crash and a tornado. Then there were a couple disasters that you couldn't select that would just happen randomly, such as a nuclear meltdown or a shipwreck. So that's what you got at the top. And then on the left side of the screen, you have all the different tiles that you could use to help build your city. You could choose a residential tile and plant it down onto your map. And residential is a big red R square. And it's a zone for your citizens to live, basically build houses on, eventually and hopefully build huge apartment buildings. It all depends on how you develop it and how well you place your zones. And then you got the big blue C block, which stands for commercial, where shops and businesses are built. And then you got the yellow I for industrial. The industrial is there to provide merchandise and goods for commercial, which helps commercial build up more and more. And it also gives your citizens a place to work. So all three things are very important to help grow your city to the biggest and get that population huge, starting from a village to a town, to a city, to a capital, to a metropolis, and then the sixth stage, a megalopolis, which I've never gotten to, but I'm going to try to at some point again get back into SimCity and go for the gold. And so beyond the residential, the commercial, and the industrial, you also need to put out some power plants, police station, fire departments, airport, a seaport, football stadiums, and sometimes you get these presents where you can put an amusement park, a library, all kinds of fun things, a train station. And then also you actually get to build your own house. You get to place your own house wherever you want on the map. You could either put it right in the center of town or away from everybody. I would always try to find an island somewhere in the middle of nowhere and put my house there. I had my own little island. And maybe an amusement park right next to it, and that's it. My own little carnival just for me, you know? So from these power plants, you got to connect everything with power lines. You got to put roads down, train tracks down, everything that a city needs to function properly. And so there's only two options of you getting money. One is you get a loan from the bank and you have to pay interest off. And two, every year you get tax money from your citizens. And if you raise the taxes too much and you get greedy and want more money, people are going to move out. And your population is going to go down. But if you lower the taxes almost to 0%, you won't get any money back, or very little, and it won't be enough to repair the roads and all that stuff that has deteriorated over time in your city. And then people are going to complain, hey, these roads aren't, and then you're going to lose population that way. So it's a lot of balancing and a lot of strategy, which I find really fun. It's a good challenge. And so basically, SimCity is just that. It's a simulation of a city. It's a little model city that you build from scratch, and you watch it grow. And it's fun to see how things build up more than other things build up based on your decisions, where you put things. It's fun. There's no wrong way to play the game. But if you do intentionally just ruin everything and just really just do a horrible job, like, you really have to try. You will eventually be fired and the game will end. But beyond that, there is no wrong way to play this game, which is also great. It's very open-ended. There's so many decisions and so many possibilities. It's endless with this game. So yeah, that's basically the whole outline and the idea of SimCity. Let's get into the history now and figure out how this game came to be, from being a tiny little computer game to being on a huge, major video game console. Alright everybody, so now it's time for the history of SimCity and where it all began, and it starts with a guy named Will Wright. So we can't really talk about the game until we talk about the creator and his quirkiness and all that, because that's what SimCity is. So SimCity, it was created by a man named Will Wright, who was born on January 20th, 1960, and his father died when he was 9 years old, so he moved to Louisiana with his mother, because that's where she grew up and she had family down there and so on and so forth. And so his childhood, he spent a lot of time as a kid obsessing over building models, such as model ships and tanks, and playing military board games and all that kind of stuff. And he seemed to be the guy where he would get an obsession for 6 months at a time and just dive deep and know every little intricacy, really go in deep with whatever subject he was studying at a time. So he started to really get to know a lot of things, just how engines worked, or wanted to know the history of Genghis Khan or whatever. So as Will grew up and he graduated high school, he enrolled into Louisiana State University, and then he later transferred to Louisiana Tech, and he got an architectural degree, and he then followed it up with mechanical engineering, which led into studying computers and robots. He excelled in subjects like economics, military history, architecture, and so on. He was just that kind of guy. He had like razor sharp focus on anything he ever wanted to do. And so that's who Will Wright is in a nutshell. That's his childhood. Now, I wanted to dive deep into knowing exactly how SimCity was. I looked into a lot of things, and there was never actually a full story until I had to look at all these different kinds of sources and figure it out myself and compile it into one thing, which I'm doing it for you. You could just sit back, enjoy, sip on a cup of coffee or some tea or a sody pop, whatever you want to do, and let's get into it. So this is like the very, very kind of birth of Will Wright getting into video games. So in 1980, after graduating Louisiana Tech, he moved to Manhattan, New York, and his model building became more elaborate, and he started building the models into homemade robots. He wanted these models he was making to start moving, and he spent a lot of his free time looking for spare parts in electronic surplus stores around New York to build more models and all that. And this is when he got his Apple II computer, and he started using it to interact with his robots. And so while he'd be like digging through these electronic surplus stores, he would come across these board games on floppy disks he could use to play on his computer. And so beyond all of these virtual board games he found on these floppy disks that came with all the other extra robot parts, he came across the very first version of Flight Simulator, which was very, very basic, just very wireframe looking stuff. And then he also came across a game called the Pinball Construction Set, in which right then and there it clicked for him, to where he could make functioning models in a digital computer form instead of real life models that just sat still on a shelf somewhere. So this made Will realize that the computer could be a modeling tool that had endless possibilities. You could do whatever you want, and it wasn't limited to tangible things. So this got him into wanting to develop a video game. And so throughout his years at Louisiana Tech, now New York, 5 years have passed, and he ups and just leaves to California, because California was the place Will saw everything happening for computers at the moment. And once he got into California, he got some work designing computer programs. And now Will, being in California, he saw other people making video games on the Apple II, so he decided to stay ahead of the curve and buy the latest computer that was out with far better graphics and study it and dedicate himself to it, so he had like a one-up on it. So he wound up buying one of the first units of the Commodore 64 and learned every little tiny thing about that computer. And so within 6 months, Will had his first playable video game ready, and he started shopping it around to 3 different game publishers in his area. Everyone said no except this little company called Broderbund. They said yes to publishing Will's first game, and Will's first game was called Raid on Bungling Bay, which in this game you controlled a helicopter you had to use to bomb factories on these little islands below. And these little islands, they had their own little world happening, a little economy with trucks and little developments happening as you flew around bombing it, trying to destroy it. So when Will started making Raid on Bungling Bay, he had to make this tool program to draw out the islands and the little cities, the coastlines, the roads, the buildings, and so on. And as he was making these little islands in this map making program, he realized he was having more fun building the little cities than bombing them with a helicopter. And so that kept him captivated, thinking, oh, maybe there could be something to that. But needless to say, Raid on Bungling Bay was first released in North America in December 1984 on the Commodore 64, and then a few months later it made it to Japan and ported onto the Famicom, which is known as the NES in Japan, in February of 1985. Now, Raid on Bungling Bay didn't do too well in the US due to piracy, but in Japan, with it being on the Nintendo Famicom, it sold over 1 million units. It was huge in Japan, just like how a lot of bands and everything else, it was big in Japan. So Will was enjoying the high life. He was getting money in now and he could take it easy, but he kept playing with this map editor that he used for Raid on Bungling Bay and thought how cool it would be to make the islands come to life. So that became an obsession, just like as a kid with any other obsession. So from there, he started researching traffic simulations, land use, and urban growth, among a lot of other things that make a city live. And so as he worked on this game more, he realized that the whole game would be this world that the player could create, and the characters inside the game would just live. And that would be the whole game. And so this was the mid-'80s where everything was action-oriented, very platformy. We had Mario Brothers, all that kind of stuff. And this was a game that was just totally out of the box. But he kept going on with it. And so in 1985, Will finished developing the first version of SimCity for the Commodore 64, which at the time he was calling it not SimCity, but Micropolis instead, which at this point was just a black, white, and gray looking game. And when Will took this game and he brought it up to Broderbund, they didn't understand and they didn't like the fact that there was no end or win or lose to the game. And so they just didn't want to publish it. They just said, hey, this ain't gonna sell. This ain't, there's no action in it. What's going on? And so SimCity, right then and there, seemed dead in the water and was put on the shelf. And so that's how we close out 1985. Very sad. Couple years later, 1987, Will goes to a computer meetup and meets a guy by the name of Jeff Braun, who at the time published font packs for the Amiga personal computer. And so Will and Jeff were talking, and Will was like, hey man, I was working on this game, check this out. And so Will shows Jeff SimCity on the Commodore 64. Jeff is looking at this and he's like, oh man, this is great. This is awesome. We should sell this. And Jeff at the time, he was working on his own game, which was like a jet fighter simulation type game. And so Jeff told Will that both of their games together would create critical mass to start a games publisher on their own, in which they did. So they formed their game company, and it was called Maxis. Boom! Maxis was born. And so here we are, 1987. Will has his own game company now, and he realizes, okay, new computers are out. What am I gonna do? I'm gonna hire some developers to help me make SimCity the best it can be with the latest computers. So that's what he did. He hired a few developers, and boom, a new, greater, action-packed, updated version of SimCity was made. But there was one thing. When Will developed the concept for SimCity, he was working at Broderbund, so they had to return to Broderbund to clear the rights to use it. So at this time now, Broderbund had a new distribution office, and when Broderbund executives saw this new version of SimCity, they saw how infectious and fun it was. And so after seeing that, they urged Jeff to sign a distribution deal with Broderbund. And so Jeff said he would do it, as long as his jet fighter game was included with the deal. And Broderbund said yes. And so after 4 long years of Will trying to sell SimCity, being in development, on February 2nd, 1989, SimCity was officially released on the Amiga, Atari ST, Commodore 64, and the PC. In 1990, more versions of the game were released on other computer formats. And so SimCity is out, and it sold rather poorly initially coming out, but it got really high praise from the gaming press, which really boosted its sales and got out there more. Now, over in Japan, Nintendo, they were working on their next game console and had their very own Shigeru Miyamoto. He's the creator of Super Mario and Zelda. He was sitting there coming up with an idea for their new system of building your own world. But he didn't know SimCity existed. So when he finally found out that it did exist, Shigeru flew all the way to California to meet Will and the Maxis team, and right then and there they struck a deal which was rumored to be around $1 million to have the rights for SimCity being on their new console, which was the Super Nintendo. Alright, so this is when Super Nintendo and the version we basically all came to know and love got into the picture. And so what Nintendo did was take SimCity and have their own development team, which was the EAD, which was short for Nintendo's Entertainment Analysis and Development Team, and they went to create SimCity from the ground up their way. And so what Nintendo did was they added more buildings and scenarios. They even changed the style of the houses to resemble more of those in Japan than North American houses in the PC version. And so besides the look of the game, there's also a lot of other changes to where instead of the Godzilla monster attack, it's Bowser. And a parody of Will Wright known as Dr. Wright as a character in the game will praise you and help you along with some advice. And so here are some other differences. Special reward buildings such as a bank to take loans out of, as well as many others to get later on in the game. Also, empty residential lots will randomly wind up turning into buildings that become schools and hospitals. The scenarios from the older versions of the game were included along with 2 new scenarios, which are the UFO attack in Las Vegas and another one called Freeland. And the music itself for the Super Nintendo version of SimCity, it's just amazing, and it was composed by Soyo Oka. She also made music for games such as Excite Bike, the NES version of Wario's Woods, Pilot Wings, Super Mario Kart, and Super Mario All-Stars, among a lot of other things. She's just a legend. So you already knew with a great game came some great music. It's just an all-around amazing package. So around June 7th, 1990, an announcement for an NES and a Super Nintendo version of SimCity would be out by summer 1991. And so a little later in the next year, in the springtime, on April 26th, 1991, SimCity for the Super Famicom in Japan was released, and in North America it was released later, along with the system itself, the Super Nintendo, in August of 1991. And so the Super Nintendo version was out, but where was this NES version? Well, after that, the NES version of SimCity only made an appearance in the January 1991 Winter Consumer Electronics Show in a small little segment on the show Video Power, and was never seen again. Or so we thought. But we'll get into that a little later. And so going back to the Super Nintendo, SimCity was one of the first games to come out along with the system, and it went on to sell 2 million copies, along with 300,000 PC copies sold altogether, and SimCity became recognized as a new chapter in the gaming industry. The success of SimCity blew open the doors for all other sim games to follow, which good or bad made it the kind of game that was here to stay. Now, our focus in this episode is mostly on the Super Nintendo version of SimCity, but we can't go through the history of SimCity without bringing up SimCity's sequels and all the other spin-off sim games that Wright put out after SimCity. And so after SimCity initially dropped in 1989 on the PC, 1990, Sim Earth on the PC, which also wound up on the Super Nintendo, dropped, and it was about you controlling basically the development of a planet and see the simulation of a planet develop. Makes sense, right? 1991 came Sim Ant, focusing on the life of ants and the various ways of digging tunnels and all that. 1992, Sim Life, which you could modify the genetics of plants and animals and create new worlds and ecosystems and control evolution. 1993, Sim Farm came, where it was much like SimCity, but you were just dealing with duties of a farm, building fences, dirt roads, buying and selling animals, planting crops, all that kind of farming type stuff. And also in 1993 came SimCity 2000, which went off to sell over 4 million copies altogether. It was the legit sequel to SimCity, which had an isometric perspective instead of a top-down perspective. And SimCity 2000 was the third and final sim game put out on the Super Nintendo. 1994 came Sim Tower, where you build up a tower, and also in 1994 was Sim Health, which had a more serious tone. It wasn't as playful as other Maxis titles were, and it was a simulation on healthcare. Really fun. Buy that for your kid. 1995 came Sim Isle Missions in the Rainforest, which was a construction and management simulation of various different islands. And also that year came Sim Town. So think of Monopoly as SimCity and Monopoly Junior as Sim Town, as Sim Town was just on a smaller scale and it was intended for kids. 1996 was a big year for sim games, so we had Sim Golf, where you could make and play your own golf courses. And then you had SimCopter. It was a flight simulator where it was almost like an early non-violent version of Grand Theft Auto 3, where you could land your helicopter in the city and walk around in the city. And there's a career mode where you can transport people, do riot control, check on traffic jams, fires and rescues, and so on. And if you had a saved file of SimCity 2000 in there, you could import your city from SimCity 2000 into SimCopter and fly your helicopter around your own city that you built, which I thought was pretty cool. Also in 96, we have SimTunes, which was originally made for the Super Nintendo in the early 90s, and it was originally titled Sound Fantasy, but it was canceled. And in SimTunes, you would draw from a palette of colors that represented a different note, and you could select up to 48 different instrument choices and pick 4 out of the 48 when making your song, and then they crawl all over the colors you put down to make music. And also the game Electroplankton for the Nintendo DS is mentioned to be the spiritual sequel to SimTunes. A little fun fact there. And the last sim game in 1996 came Sim Park, which was also made for kids, just like Sim Town and SimTunes. It was to learn on managing and cultivating a successful park. And now we are in 1997, where things get a little rocky and come to a point. Streets of SimCity, which was our car racing game and car combat game, came out and was released. And in July 28th, 1997, Will Wright, realizing how a lot of the offshoot sim games like SimCopter and others were just lacking, he agreed to swap stock with Electronic Arts for $125 million to help Maxis have a stronger distribution. But that still didn't change the fact that Will Wright was still with Maxis and helped work on titles. So in 1998, Sim Safari came out, which was much like Sim Park, but only this was set in Africa rather than North America. And then in 1999 came SimCity 3000, which looked a bit like SimCity 2000, only much more larger, with waste management being introduced. And then in 2000, SimCity 64 came out on the Nintendo 64 DD, which was a system add-on for the Nintendo 64 that only came out in Japan, where you could build your city and actually walk around in the 3D streets as if you lived in it yourself. Sadly, along with the Nintendo 64 DD, it never made it outside of Japan. And of course, we can't forget, 2000 also brought the biggest and one of the best-selling games of all time, The Sims, which was a life simulator, and you controlled the actions and the management of the lives of people, or, you could call them Sims, you create in a living, moving dollhouse type setting. There's so many different versions of The Sims and all that, but this ain't about The Sims. Just mentioning it here, and we're moving on. Okay. So now we're leaving all the other sim games alone, and we're just focusing on the SimCity titles from here on out in the new millennium. So in 2003, SimCity 4 came out, and it was just more expanded. You could import your Sims from The Sims into the city. And this was the first SimCity game Will Wright wasn't a part of at all. 4 more years pass, and in 2007, SimCity DS and SimCity Societies is released. Then in 2008, SimCity Creator for the Nintendo DS and Wii is released. 2009, Will Wright leaves Maxis, and he's off doing his own thing now. 2012, SimCity Social, which was just a game on Facebook where you could create a city and visit your other Facebook friends' cities, and it lasted for less than a year before it shut down for good. But it's a game, it has SimCity in it, and it just needs to be mentioned. And so 2013 came, and it came with the final legit version of SimCity, which is just called SimCity, but a lot of people just title it SimCity 2013. And it was just full of a lot of upgrade stuff with a lot more just bells and whistles. And then after that, the last title with SimCity in it as a game, 2014, it was a mobile game, and it's called SimCity Build It. I've played it on my phone. It's just a huge cash grab. I don't like it. But that's where SimCity ends. So looking back at all these games and all the improvements and the enhancements and the upgraded graphics and all that stuff, I still would rather just go back to Super Nintendo and play the original. Even though it's less detailed and more watered down, that's the one I like, and that's the one I have the most fun with. And that's how it's going to be, and I'll be playing that forever and ever. So you're wondering, whatever happened to the creator after he left Maxis in 2009? Where's old Will Wright at now? Well, let's play some catch up here. He currently lives in Oakland, California with his wife and 3 sons. He has an older daughter too, and after creating The Sims and making less successful games like Spore in 2008, he is now currently working on a mobile game called Proxy, Proxi, where, according to the website, it says it's a simulation of an artificial intelligence based on your memories and interaction with the game. And yeah, so that's your history on SimCity and a look into the creator's life as well. Whew, and so that is your history of SimCity. Did I leave something out? Maybe. Yeah, we're going to go and look back at the Super Nintendo version a little bit more with a fine comb and really take a look at the scenarios, the special buildings, and some cheat codes, and a whole lot more. So we'll be getting into that next.
Snacks and grab your drinks. Oh yeah! It's video games time.
We got to get down to brass tacks. This is some serious stuff. Now, before we get into what we're going to talk about, we also got to check how many more days we have until Animal Crossing New Horizons for the Nintendo Switch comes out. Let's take a look at the old calendar, and we've got 45 more days to go. We are getting down there. We're ready. I'm ready. I'm ready to take a nice old vacation myself here. We're going to take a look now at the SimCity for Super Nintendo cheat sheet. So first up, let's look at the exclusive present buildings you could only get in the Super Nintendo version. So you could get the bank, and that's after you get a population of 10,000 and have $1,999 or less in your funds. Then you could get the mayor's house when you reach a population of 2,000 people. Then the next one, you have the choice between an amusement park or a casino. And there's 5 times you could either pick between one or the other. You can get a large park. And next up, you could get the expo. And that's when you have a population of 10,000 people and at least 1 airport and 1 seaport. After that, you could get the police headquarters, where after 6 police departments are in your city, it'll pop up. Then we can get a library, just for all the kids to come and read Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss. You could get 2 train stations. Next up, just like the police headquarters, the fire headquarters, you get 3 of them. And then after the 50th anniversary of your in-game year of your city, you get a water fountain. And you only get one water fountain, so plant it somewhere very, very special, right next to your house. Next up, you can get a zoo, and you get 2 of them. Now, this isn't like a building or anything, but it's a present that you get that's like a special view of your town in the options setting. And you get this after hitting a population in your city of 50,000 people. Next up, you could get the windmill, and you could get 2 of those. And this next one is after you're starting to run out of places to put things in your city on your map. They offer a landfill option that you could use to make land where water is in your city, so you could build more things on it. So you could get up to 9 landfill spaces in your city after you maxed out every other area to build on. And then the last special present for all you super players, we've got the Mario statue that you get after a population of 500,000, and that's when you reach the Megalopolis stage, which I've never made, but I plan on doing that very soon. So those are the special present buildings you can get in SimCity on Super Nintendo. Now let's take a look at the scenarios and the different ways to play the game besides just building a city. There are scenarios, and they set up with a pre-made city, and you are given the task within a certain amount of in-game years to correct the issue. So the first scenario that you have is the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. The second scenario, you've got the Tokyo monster attack of 1961. Scenario number 3, we've got burn traffic in 1965. Next up, we've got Boston 2010. And in the Super Nintendo version of this game, the meltdown is blamed on the simultaneous flushing of every toilet in the city during halftime of the 2010 Nintendo Bowl. Scenario number 5, we've got Detroit crime in 1972. Goal number 6, we've got the Rio de Janeiro coastal flooding of 2047. And then we got the last 2, which are only exclusive to the Super Nintendo version. It's the Las Vegas UFO attacks of 2096. And last but not least, the final scenario, we've got Freeland 1999, which your goal is to build a megalopolis on a plot of land that has no water, and you got an infinite amount of time to work on this. And a funny little Easter egg is when you look at the forest area in the center of this map of land, it's in the shape of Mario's head. So, cool. Yeah. All right, do you guys like cheat codes? Do you want to cheat in the game like I did? Okay, here we go. So I mentioned the $1 million code, and this is how you do it, all right? So you first got to spend all of your money, 000, just across the board, and make sure that you build at least one police station and fire station in your city. And then you go to the tax menu and you set all the taxes to 0, just every single thing in there, set it to 0. Then you wait until the end of the year, and as soon as the screen turns black to show the tax screen, hold L on your controller, the little shoulder button, left side. And while holding L, you change the tax level and all the fundings to 0 if you haven't done that already. And then you select the big pink button at the bottom that says Go with Figures. Now you still got to be holding L after all that. And now wait for the next year to turn onto your screen. So now it's January 1901 if you spent all your money in 1900, okay? Keep holding L and you return to the menu where it has the tax screen, all right? Now you raise all the fund settings to 100% except for the tax rate. You keep that at 0. Okay, so now you exit out of all of the menus and you go back to the screen that you could, play on and everything, and you let go of the L button. And your money should turn from all 0s to all 9s all across the board. There's also a practice mode, and it's a lot smaller of a map just to introduce new players to it. It's just a little island you could practice on, and that's it. But now, it's time to check out some unreleased stuff. Do you like some unreleased stuff? Stuff I had to go digging hardcore to find? Some facts? Well, we're going to get into that right now. Now comes the time to talk about something I've been wanting to talk about forever and ever and ever. Ever since I found out that this thing existed, I thought it would just never come to fruition. I thought it would always be lost forever. Here we are. We're going to talk about it. The prototype for SimCity on the NES. So, okay, how do we know this even existed? Well, it was developed even before the Super Nintendo version was, and it was shown at the Winter Consumer Electronics Show in 1991, and then it was canceled. So for decades, it was thought to be lost or just tucked away in some Nintendo executive's desk drawer to just never be seen ever again. But funny little thing, 26 years later, in 2017, an owner of 2 cartridges of the NES SimCity prototype, he brought them into a Portland Retro Gaming Expo to see what he could get for it. So one was bought for a real large amount of money, obviously, and the other went back with the original owner. He took the other one back home. So the buyer donated it to the Video Game History Foundation, and now a ROM of the prototype is available. So yeah, you could go online right now and download a ROM of this prototype and play it. It's pretty cool. Now, this may just be a prototype, but it is said and known that the NES version of SimCity was never 100% finished anyways. So if you're wondering what the difference is between the NES version and the Super Nintendo version of SimCity is, so the music was different, and there was a lower grade of graphics, obviously, and the residential, commercial, and industrial tiles were a lot smaller in size. You only had one option of a power plant, which was nuclear. There were far more limited colors, obviously, on a 8-bit compared to a 16-bit console, you're going to have that. But the one difference that the NES version had that the Super Nintendo version didn't have was at the beginning of the game, you could enter your favorite word. And after playing 50 in-game years, your sister city would gift you the Statue of Liberty. So say you put in your favorite word was dog. After playing the game for 50 in-game years, it's going to pop up and say, hey, your sister city, dog, is going to gift you the Statue of Liberty to place in your city. Which I think is pretty cool. I wish that would have went into the Super Nintendo version, but oh well, neat little thing. And so getting on to the music, it was done by the same composer who composed the Super Nintendo version, Soyo Oka, where a lot of the music was different except for the Dr. Wright tracks and the track for the Metropolis level, which Soyo Oka herself claims that the Metropolis track, it's one of her favorite songs that she's ever created. So yeah, if you want to look online and see people play it, it's available on YouTube, and but it's cool just to see that it's finally out and it's available. I'm gonna get around to play it at some point, for sure. Like everybody, like all the dudes in California, for sure, dude, for sure. Now, if you thought I was done, oh, you got another thing coming. I dig in this rabbit hole, and I just come up with more goodies than I ever thought I could find, okay? So I don't know, you want me to go in these deep dives on a subject, and you're gonna say, oh man, no more, please, it's too much. Well, I'm gonna give it to you. I'm gonna give it all to you. Okay, there's one more game that was released, highly rare, unless you know somebody who knows somebody who knew somebody. But we're talking about a game called Sim Refinery. You're gonna scratch your head and think, what's Sim Refinery, huh? So let me give you a backstory. There were several companies that were banging on Will Wright's wall after the success of SimCity and seeing how simulations could be a learning thing. And they were wanting Will to make simulations for their operations and to train their employees, help them understand why their companies work the way they do. So in 1993, Will said yes to one request from Chevron Corporation and developed Sim Refinery to simulate Chevron's refinery operation. There's actually an article about this, and Will Wright explained how the game worked in an interview, and he said, Sim Refinery was a simulation of their refinery operation for orienting people in the company as to how a refinery works. It wasn't so much for the engineers as it was for the accountants and managers who walked through this refinery every day and didn't know what these pipes were carrying. So it was for accountants and managers and people in offices that, oh, what's that do? What's that do? So the players in this game had the role to be the plant manager of a refinery, and you had to learn the idea of supply and demand and how it affected the company financially. Now, if you were looking at the game, it resembled SimCity a bit, but instead of building zones, it was oil tanker ports, petroleum storage, and piping systems. And since it was a commissioned business aid by Chevron, it was never available to the public, and only Chevron managers and accountants got to play it. I dug deep, and from one article that I found, it said Chevron spent about $75,000 on a sim refinery prototype, and it lacked some features. For example, the user should be able to design and build the refinery, as well as operate it, for example. But so far, his team is still waiting for the go-ahead and the money to finish and introduce it to the company. People at Chevron like it, Chevron computer engineer said, but this is still a big leap to make with the merger of games and trading. And apparently, no copies of Sim Refinery exist, and what's left are only a few screenshots of the game, so if you Google Sim Refinery, you're only going to see about 3 pictures. Yeah, that's about it. Now, there's 2 more sim games that were being worked on but never made it out of development, and they were Sim Election and Sim Environment. And with that, my friends, that about wraps up everything you'll ever need to know about SimCity. All right, let's get out of here.
I love it. I listen to it all the time.
Industrial Industries World Radio.
Yeah, best radio station ever.
Yeah, good as always, sweetie. What do you think, sweetie?
Get nice and comfy, sitting back down in the seat. And it's just you and I now. Mano y mano. I'm gonna sip a cup of coffee here. I think my first recollection of anything about the sim games was, I think about 1993, 94. I got a video game. I don't know if it was for Christmas or for my birthday, but it was Sim Earth. And I just vaguely remember like a purple screen. And I just didn't know what I was doing, to the point where we returned the game and we got store credit to go get something else, some other game. And so I didn't even think about Sim Earth ever again. And probably to this day, I still probably wouldn't have fun playing it. Had no idea that there was another sim game, such as SimCity, out. You know, I was the usual video game consumer, which was Super Mario and that kind of stuff. And so years went by, till about 97. The summer of 97, let's just say some bad things were happening within my family. And my parents split up, and me and my younger brother, Dean, were living in a different city in a trailer. My dad was living at the house still, and that's where all the video game systems were. It was kind of like an impromptu move, so there really wasn't much there. Like, I brought my boombox and some tapes and some CDs, and we had a TV on a little TV rack, and we had a TV, like a 32-inch, which was, you know, medium size back in the day. It was a decent size. And that was about it. And so we were staying with our mom most of the time. Moved into this place, didn't have video games or whatever, so we just started playing outside. And I see this kid a few trailers down, and I just recognized him from somewhere. I'm like, I put 2 and 2 together, and I realized this kid went to our school. Why is he out here now? And it's like, oh, he must have just moved too. So I introduce myself and I say, hey, you went to the school I went to. I was like, yeah, I remember you walking around because you had something stuck in your leg or something, your leg was hurt. He was like, yeah, I was walking on the railroad ties at the playground there and I fell and I slipped and, there was a peg or a nail sticking in it and it went in my leg. I was like, ah, man. we get to talking, we become friends, and, we play football and, catch out in the front yard or whatever. And the reason why he was out here in the trailer park now was because of the fact that his dad caught his mom cheating on him, and so his dad got kicked out, and he moved into the trailer there. And this kid, his name was Dennis, went along with his dad because he said, yeah, my mom didn't want nothing to do with me. She went off and got her own life. She said she didn't want nothing to do with me or my dad. And so that was his story for being out in the trailer park. And I have a few memories with him where we went to this clubhouse with Dean, my younger brother. He tagged along, and there was all these other times we'd be hanging out with them, and there was this group of teenagers in the trailer park. They all walked around. Now, this is the mid-90s. This is 1997. They'd be walking around in their Jinko jeans and the Airwalks, and they're smoking cigarettes and whatever else, playing hacky sack. We were a lot younger. I was 11 at the time. Dennis was a year younger than me, but he'd be like, oh, those are all my friends. I'm going to go hang out with them. I'll see you guys later. And we're like, okay. I didn't want to hang out with that group because they're bad kids. They smoke cigarettes, and they're only 14. So bad. So we just go home, and I'd just, sit in the room and listen to the 5 CDs I had. 311, AC/DC Back in Black, INXS's Greatest Hits, and a few other CDs. Sammy Hagar's Marching to Mars, which I borrowed from my dad. But then it came to a point where I talked to Dennis about video games. And he was like, oh, I got a Super Nintendo, but I don't play it anymore because I hang out with those kids in the trailer park all the time. And yeah, video games are for kids. It's funny, this 9-year-old, 10-year-old telling me video games are for kids. So he wound up lending me his Super Nintendo because he didn't have no use for it anymore. And me being kind of like a homebody and a geek, oh, video games, yes, something to do in this trailer park. Besides stare at the wall and listen to the same CD every day. And so he lended me a Super Nintendo and 3 games. Now, one of the games was like a football game I just didn't care about. Another game was Disney's Aladdin, which is amazing. It's an amazing game for the Super Nintendo. Really, I definitely recommend that one. It's a great one. And this game called SimCity. He put the Super Nintendo down on the floor there in our house, and we hooked it up, and he was like, all right, I got these 3 games here. I know how to play the sports game, but I'm not into it. I know Aladdin, and I was like, SimCity. I was like, I don't know what that one's all about. He's like, oh, well, I'll pop it in real quick. And he popped it in, and he showed me how to play it, and I was like, oh, this looks like, that reminds me of that Sim Earth game I had, but this is different. I was like one of those kids that was like, no, that's stupid, it looks too hard, oh, I have to learn this and learn that. You're not supposed to learn anything in video games, I don't want to learn nothing. But Dennis just showing me that little bit and showing me how fun it could be, man. And he's like, okay, first what you want to do is you want to put down a power plant. And he did that. And he's like, now you need to put some residential down so you can have people live in. And then you need to put down some commercial right next to it. And then after the commercial, you put some industrial. And we put it all together with some roads. And then you put... So he showed me the very basics of how to set up the game. And then he sent me on my way, and he left and hung out with the cool kids in Airwalks and Jinko jeans. And then he left me to play SimCity. And right then and there, him giving me that 30-second tutorial, I was off to the races. And I was just like, oh man, this is so cool. It like totally rewired my 11-year-old brain to think like video games could be more in depth than just jump over this, hop over this hole, duck, that kind of stuff. And so the rest of my summer, any chance I had to get my hands on a Super Nintendo controller, that's what I would be playing. And now I had no strategy of how to play the game at the time. Dennis showed me just a little bit of how to get started, but through trial and error, I kind of strategized and got myself up to a city, and it was just a fun little challenge for me. Early morning, 8 o'clock, when no one else is awake yet, and the morning light's just coming in, and it's dark inside the house. And there I am, just sitting on the freshly rolled out white carpet on the floor and playing SimCity till it was time for us to go somewhere, go grocery shopping or something. And besides just the game, getting immersed in the world and just really getting into it, the music itself, the soundtrack, was just really calming, really nice, peaceful kind of stuff. And so at this time, I didn't know about the $1 Million Cheat, so I just really strategized hard and played it how it should be played. And yeah, man, I just played so much SimCity at that time. Towards the end of the summer, my parents made up and they got back together. And it was time for me to leave the trailer park after being there for 3 or so months. And I remember unhooking the Super Nintendo, giving Dennis back his Super Nintendo and SimCity and all the games. And I said, "Here you go, man." He said, "Why are you giving this back to me?" I said, "Well, my parents are back together and we're leaving here." And he was like, "Oh, okay. Well, all right then." I was like, "Yeah, okay, I'll see ya." And that was the last time I ever saw Dennis. And I think back now and it's like, man, what a really cool dude. Even though he had no use for video games and he was too cool for video games, he was that nice to hang out with some kid that just moved into the neighborhood and really took the time, let him borrow the Super Nintendo, show me the games and hang out and do all that stuff. And, you know, that was really nice of him. And I wish I could thank him. I don't know. I have to look him up on Facebook sometime. I don't even know his last name. I just know his name is Dennis. Yeah, so that was my first experience with SimCity. And since then, and I had a Super Nintendo back at the house when we moved back in. So the first thing I did when I moved back, I was like, I'm getting SimCity. And so then my love for SimCity branched on forever. I was just sitting on a different piece of carpet playing SimCity back at my old house. And so SimCity is always that game where I always feel at home with. I could play it wherever, and I'll always just be taken back to that trailer, sitting on the carpet, just staring at that screen and playing it for hours and hours on end, and just completely loving it. So I'll come across some people that are like, "You like that first SimCity game? SimCity 2000 is so much better. First SimCity sucks." Well, I don't care, bro. I like the first SimCity. Leave me alone. To this day, I still have SimCity on my virtual console on my Wii, so that's how I play it to this day. So yeah, that's my story of playing SimCity. As this episode of Industrial Industries World Radio comes to a close, I want to thank Kimmy Pops for voiceover work, Giuliano for graphic design. I also want to thank you for listening, especially these when I do these long, deep dives into a subject and there isn't much else to the episode besides the actual topic. Email me if you enjoy these types of shows, just like the Toys R Us episode I went deep into. I know I always wanted to do this episode on SimCity because SimCity was a game that made such a huge impact to me, and I wanted to do it justice and just cut out all the fat, just trim the fat and just leave nothing but the muscle, just nothing but straight facts and my honest experience. And there's one more thing I do want to add, since it's fitting for the end of the show. Whenever you go to the menu and go to the load save menu, there is always this end game thing you could click on. I would click on that and it would just show a blue screen with this moon. It'd be sleeping in this little window and it'd be blowing up this star as he'd sleep and breathe. And it would always say, "See you soon, goodbye." And I would just kind of keep it on that screen and just like chill out and just listen to the music. Because the music, man, in that screen, just go and check it out if you can. It's just so calming. That thing, I could listen to that for hours and it just, it's just so calming. But yeah, if you do enjoy these episodes, make sure to email me at industrialindustriesworldradio@gmail.com and let me know. Or you could rate this show 5 stars and put in the comments, "I love episodes like this," or however you want to communicate with me. That's cool. All right. That closes up episode 15 of Industrial Industries World Radio. I am DJ Glowing Ice. I will see you next week for another fun-filled episode, and stay tuned for that. And in the words of the moon, sleeping at the end screen of SimCity. See you soon. Goodbye.
See you next time on Industrial Industries World Radio.